Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce podcast. Ecommerce specializes in optimizing order fulfillment supply chain for DTC brand owners selling China-produced products. We're here in this episode because I would say this month was rather eventful. We're going to give you an update, especially about the import tariffs of what is it that actually is happening now? What is there to be expected and how can you prepare for it? It's going to be a lot of details and nuances, but you can always rewind if you want to catch up again. Might gonna go a little bit fast, but it's going to be very insightful. It's going to be all the facts that we know that are confirmed facts on how the industry is going to evolve and has shaped. All right, Dayu. That was rather an eventful few weeks. How are you doing?
Great now, actually. Things are stabilizing now. So just to confirm on the date right now, it is February 21st. So if you're listening to this, all this information is relevant and up to date up to February 21st. But given how the last couple of weeks panned out, things could change tomorrow. Things could change next week as well. So just keep that in mind. So it's been a wild couple of weeks starting February 1st, actually. That was exactly when the initial executive order that was signed by Trump first started making its ways across the US government. Now, when I say that it first started is because actually the details of that order weren't actually exactly clear on February 1st either. They kind of just evolved through the next couple of days, and they were more clear around February 3rd or 4th or so. There were two big items in that executive order. So one was 10% additional tariffs on Chinese-made products. And by the way, I'm talking only about the order that was on China tariffs. There are many, many orders out there on other tariffs in other countries and other government changes, but we're talking about China tariffs here. So 10% additional tariffs, and also what was previously a lesser known rule in US Customs that was called Section 321, or it's more informally these days called the de minimis rule. That was temporarily at the time eliminated for all Chinese-made products. So those are the two big announcements. And actually, those are technically the only two big updates in that executive order. Now, Simon, e-commerce is kind of on the ground, and everyone probably related to anything that has to do with China logistics, China ship, China products. Everyone was concerned. Some were freaking out. What were you actually hearing out there, Simon? So technically I was on Chinese New Year's break, so this all started when I was still on holidays. So Simon, you were actually the one that kind of came to me and was like, hey, well, you're still on break, Dayu, but we should really talk about like all that stuff that's happening these days. Tell me a little bit about kind of what you were seeing and hearing during that time.
Yeah, Trump really impacted my days for sure because, like you said, we were on a 10-day break, well-deserved break for our team. And pretty much during that break, towards the last 4 or 5 days of that break, the announcement came. And that really shook up the whole industry. Not just the industry, but obviously we have like 100 plus clients. They all started reaching out and they knew that the team was off. So they started DMing me and team members that were actually working. And then you have to really navigate that very, very quickly. Okay, what are the facts? And that's the noise that we see, right? Because whenever that announcement came, immediately an hour after, there were people posting on social media, making news blog posts on this is going to destroy the whole industry. Temu is going to be banned, blah, 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 blah. And they haven't been reading carefully, to be honest. Most of them, at least. And that's also why we also always want to, okay, let's collect the facts, go to the source, dig deeper. Okay, it's just these two things that you described, the additional 10% and the de minimis that is most likely going to go away. So these two obviously have an impact, but what does that impact look like? And the challenge was not just only responding to our clients with questions that we were still figuring out, but we wanted to give them open and transparent updates on a daily basis, whether it's going to be just everything we knew and just they can decide what questions they further have, and that will evolve our Q&A, so to say, as well. But the difficult thing is that we're still working with Chinese logistic companies who are also still off. So it was announced, I think, just before the weekend. And then on Wednesday, everyone has started to reopen again with handling orders and fulfillment. They also had to formalize a statement themselves. Okay, are we going to ship? Are we going to pause? If we're going to ship, how is it going to work? Should we charge extra? What does that extra look like? Is it a fixed charge? Is it an incremental increase on the pricing? So there were a lot of things that were going on at the same time, but everyone was talking about the same thing, but the impact was very various. And us navigating that really compliments to our team on how we did that, and our clients were extremely happy. I've had calls with clients, they're really almost crying. It's like, our business is done now. So no, your business is not done. Just look at the facts. We are here with you. If it's going to be done, we would have told you it's going to be done, because we're still in play, and we're still in play and helping you succeed. And that really helped them, just to give them also a listening ear, because a lot of them, you have to realize, are solopreneurs, or they are CEO of companies that no one else to talk to really also relieve their frustration, or getting their facts out, or just mirroring their thoughts. And that's the beauty, I would say, of Ecommerce, that we are really an extension. And these times show how much of an extension we are for them, to actually listen to them, hear them out, almost like a consultant, right? Just helping them to navigate this difficult period of time. I would say we came out stronger. Our team is far more educated about the industry itself and what's happening. Our clients are well prepared, and they were prepared already, right? Because we have episode 16 and 20 that has been launched, that our clients already have utilized to, okay, I need to prepare my HTS codes. I need to get this ready. I need to get that ready. So all there's things, we've prepped them really well. But still, obviously, the surprise was for everyone, big time.
Yeah, so just to briefly go back in time from the timeline. So essentially what happened was that technically Chinese New Year, the formal holiday, was until February 4th. And everyone who was shipping from China knows that if you were still selling during that time, you would have a backlog of orders waiting for your 3PL and logistics to reopen again. And basically between February 1st and like February 4th, or like actually the midnight of February 5th, actually, it was when the ruling actually fully went into effect. Everyone's trying to figure out like, what does it actually mean? But the thing is, like, for better or for worse, logistics wasn't actually like really shipping stuff yet anyway. So technically we had time. And by the way, one aside is that for all those like, China-based 3PLs that were supposedly like actually working during Chinese New Year's, none of them actually got any packages out before the actual deadline. So what were they actually doing? Were they actually shipping out packages on February 2nd, right, when they were supposed to be working? Anyways, that's just an aside there. But going back to the actual issue at hand, is there were two big updates in this order. Let's talk about the somewhat easier one first, which is the additional 10% tariff. Easier as easier to understand, not necessarily easier to stomach.
This is an important one, Dayu, because
Yeah.
that one has been a lot of confusion about,
Yeah, I mean,
especially
it
that
is.
word.
So yeah, so what I heard most commonly is there's going to be 10% tariff on everything. And it's like, no, 10% additional. Okay, additional. There are already a lot of ranges of tariffs for at least consumer product that you would sell, kind of like coming from China. Basically, like everything from China now has three different tariff rates. One is going to be your base tariff, which could range from sometimes zero, actually like EV cars, like 100% base tariff or something like that, right? But it's like, there's a huge range there, but it could be 0, 10, 20%. And then hopefully more people will understand this recently, but over the last couple of decades, there's been a series of tariffs on China called Section 301. So if you don't know about it, I mean, just Google it, Section 301 tariffs on China. There are four massive lists of different products through times that have different rates of tariffs between 7.5% to 25% if you're on that list. And then you have the 10% additional tariff. I'll give you one tangible example is that, we're also, I'm working on a skincare brand. So for this kind of skincare product, the base tariff is actually luckily 0% base tariff. And actually, when some people see that, when they look up their tariff rates in a HTS lookup tool, it's like, oh, 0% tariff. Okay, I'm safe. And then add 10% on that. No. Then you also need to find if that product is on the Section 301 list. Most likely it is. Skincare products are on that list. And that has a 25% Section 301 tariff. And then 10% on top of that. So for this specific skincare product, that means a total of 35% total final tariff. So that 10% is additional. Okay, not just 10%. Just wanted to make it very, very clear out there. So if you haven't really kind of considered your total tariff rate, if you're using a DDP method before, for example, or if you're using China fulfillment, you really need to understand like what your total tariff rate actually is. And that 10% is 10% additional.
Yeah, and the 10% is for B2B and B2C, just anything coming from China. So we're talking about just this impact was across the whole industry, obviously.
Oh yeah, that is actually very important. A very important nuance is it's everything made in China, not shipped from China. That was a very important detail that they got there for the order. And previously it was always thought that, oh, you can try to avoid these tariffs by shipping your products to Mexico, for example. You can't do that. Actually, that point gets more important as we talk about de minimis. So I'll kind of pause on that there, and we'll talk about how important that made in China versus shipped from China is when we talk about the next step.
Yeah, because technically all these import tariffs, the 301 was already there for B2B import, but wasn't there yet for the B2C. So in that case, nothing new was happening that wasn't there already, but it just got activated because of the minimus. But I just want to pause really quickly. There's a case study that Dayu described about the brand. It is on YouTube video as well, where you see it more visual. This line, in total, the 35% that he mentioned. So make sure that you check it out if you're not really clear, okay, how does it work? What the impact looks like? There's a case study online on YouTube. We put the link in the show notes. It's going to be very valuable for you as well, especially for people who want to visualize and see, okay, how does that work? But these tariffs, the most important with the tariffs, before we go to the second part kind of that, is the HTS codes. And the HTS codes, we got a lot of questions. Our clients not knowing what it is, or assuming that HS code is the same as HTS code. How many they're providing us with 6-digit numbers when actually it should be 10. How do they navigate that then the best way? Because that was one of the consequences of import tariffs. Okay, how do I optimize my HTS codes then, I would say?
Yeah, so definitely check out that portion in the YouTube video that I made where I actually screen shared and go through these tools. But yeah, like there are actually official tools out there. Now, if you have already done traditional imports already, like hopefully you already know your HTS code. So if you cleared like a container before, then that HTS code should actually be valid. However, if you're using freight, but like DDP or like, China direct fulfillment, then probably HTS codes didn't really matter for you that much before. Or if you knew about it, I wouldn't be confident that it's totally accurate, because if you're using something like DDP method, it's not necessarily like the most important for it to be completely accurate and precise. Now, the HTS code, I mean, it's like simply put, it's basically just a code that identifies the product itself, and it is used to determine the duty rate for that specific product. There are 6-digit versions, there's 8 digits, there's 10 digits. So what's the actual difference, right? So the 6-digit is basically just description of like the actual product type category in itself. Whereas the next 2 digits, the 7 and 8 digits, that's actually what determines the actual duty rate for the United States. So you're going to see that 6-digit HS code in a lot of areas. That just describes a product, and that might be used for other countries, other import needs as well. However, for the US specifically, it's the HTS code where the 7 and 8th digits, they determine what the actual duty rate is. And then the 9th and 10th digits, that's basically just like a suffix describing like more details about the product itself. So actually the 9th and 10th digits, it is important to have a 10-digit code to be complete, but the 9th and 10th digits don't matter quite as much. Definitely not for duty. In a lot of situations, it's just 00, because it's just kind of like, that there's no additional information that's actually needed. So that, that kind of creates a lot of confusion. Like what is 6 versus 8 versus 10 digits? But that's exactly why. But essentially it's just a way to understand what the product category is, what the duty rate actually is and should be collected, and, any additional details that are relevant about the product itself. The reason why we're talking a lot about this is because it really starts to matter a lot now. And actually it started to matter even back as early as September of 2024. And now so let's talk about Section 321, the de minimis. What the de minimis rule was, essentially it is a threshold. So right now, currently it's $800. if your single package, parcel, shipment, whatever it might be, to a US based recipient, anything that's under $800, it used to be, currently is still completely duty free. Now, before, as in before September 2024, it used to fast track through customs with no scrutiny at all. So basically, like if you declare something under $800, no one cares. Like you can declare whatever you want, and like it just kind of goes through customs completely scot free. Now, there's been a lot of misunderstanding that this is something that President Trump all of a sudden enacted. That's not true, actually, because even back in September 2024, and by the way, like we actually talked about this in some previous recordings, President Biden, the previous US president, already announced that there needed to be restrictions on the de minimis process. Now, at the time, though, it was more focused around the idea of additional scrutiny on the process, because there was actually a very real problem of bad actors shipping illegal, illicit goods using this method. I mean, literally people were shipping fentanyl and like declaring it as something else and declaring it under $800 and clearing customs without any kind of scrutiny at all. So that was a big problem, right? So at that time, when Ecommerce first heard about it, we already started making the relevant adjustments, having the relevant communications with our couriers, first of all, to make sure that we're only working with couriers that have appropriate processes and accurate processes for actually collecting the right HTS codes, and then using a legitimate customs processing approach in order to get parcels through without getting restricted or kind of creating issues. And we make sure to work with our clients to make sure that we have the correct HTS codes. And we were aware of a lot more scrutiny at borders because of this. So hopefully no one's selling fentanyl, so I assume that most of the audience here, this didn't really affect at all. However, there were a lot of other gray area cases like supplements, for example. You cannot ship supplements legally, small parcel, because like you have to go through like normal FDA process, but you just can't do it legally. But there were a lot of 3PLs out there. They were saying that they could ship supplements using China shipping. And basically what they were doing is that they were just declaring it as something else. They were declaring it as something, clothing or something like that. And basically like those kinds of loopholes have been closed. I mean, definitely now, but they started getting closed back in September. Rightfully so, a lot more scrutiny at the borders to make sure at the very least that, customer that brands or shippers weren't shipping illegal goods or restricted goods into the US. So that was already something that already saw some restrictions on just free-for-all customs clearing for all products. And that's something that Ecommerce has at least built a lot of capabilities over the last couple of months to make sure that we adhere to that. And by the way, like make sure you're working with a supplier or 3PL that actually knows how to deal with HTS codes, or else more and more so your packages are going to have issues at customs. And then what Trump specifically added on top of that was closing the $800 threshold for duty free. He eliminated it to zero. Basically, not only did every single parcel have to be cleared accurately with clear HTS codes, he made it so that they were not duty free. So that was huge, actually. So that was what I'm saying. Like this second part is a much bigger deal for anyone who is shipping parcels directly from China into the US to customers, or anyone who is using any kind of DDD shipping at all, DDD freight at all. And unless you're moving entire containers by sea and using customs brokers, very likely you've at least dabbled in some form of DDP shipping, whether it's air or LCL sea shipment. And so that was what caused a huge, massive level of concern, especially the first couple of days. Like the last couple of days of Chinese New Year's and like the first couple of days we started shipping again. And no one exactly knew how to deal with this, especially at the time. Yeah. So then Simon, then what happened, right? I mean, how did our clients, how did the industry react?
I think that was the next level of stress because, like we said, there were thousands of orders pending because of Chinese New Year that were not shipped out. And for our clients wanted to get them shipped out as soon as possible because there are going to be implication, obviously, if consumers are not receiving the orders. So that was the squeeze. And then it was like, okay, we can ship it out for you, but you're going to be charged the extra additional 10%. And then we got the update like the night before we actually starting fulfillment, it's not just the 10%. There's going to be also an handling fee at each order is subject to an handling fee or customs fee. And that fee was significant. It adds up to close to $3, basically. It was a little bit less, but let's for convenience just say $3, which was another blow that we have to inform our clients in a transparent way. Look, it's not just going to be the 10% additional on top of your import tariffs as well. So it's most likely going to be 30 or 40% extra cost, but also an additional $3. That really shook the industry even harder, because like if this is going to be the future, then that means we are done with the US, or we need to move inventory there because we cannot work with these kind of margins. And that was really something that hit hard, and that removed the minimis, but also the impact of that means every parcel needs to be cleared. That means everything is going to be subject to tax. That means that there's going to be a handling fee. And that was presented to us as well by the Chinese logistic companies who just got back to office, or actually not yet back to office, but about to come back to office. So we started informing all these tens of thousands of parcels, all of our clients, to say like, okay, if you want us to fulfill, this is going to be your cost. And then most actually agreed, because they were also a little bit in a squeeze of not fulfilling is more costly for the long-term brands that they're building versus pausing. Some decided to pause for a while and wait an extra few days. That really made it very intense, because it was a choice of I'm going to make loss on all the orders pending, or I'm going to need to give up my brand almost. Almost these two extremes were top of mind for a lot of the e-com brands. And then a few days later, the impact is not just for our clients, right? The impact is also on customs border control, where they have so much work that suddenly comes to their way. Postal companies shut down for a while, say we're not accepting any parcels from USPS, not accepting any parcels from China. There were complaints from customs, we don't have the capacity to do so. There's still no systems need to be in place, because if you're going to do the correct HTS codes and you're going to do the correct declaration, correct everything, it has to be an electronic flow of data. It is not a manual flow. I mean, the checking might be manual, but it's going to be sample size checking. There's no way you can check all these millions of parcels coming in on a daily basis. There has to be flows in place, data structure in place, infrastructure. And it's not just one department that needs to get access to it. There are multiple departments that need to tap into that same source of data, which is just simply not in place. So it was a very unrealistic move to do this that suddenly, but it was coming. I mean, and it's still going to come at some point. But to prepare the infrastructure for the US side to be ready, that was something that, and reduce that impact, that was probably the main driver of postponing it and just kind of returning back to the original. And that's what happened. So all of our clients that we've informed that they were charged more, the $3 plus potentially 30 or more percent, have all been returned back to their accounts. It's also been back to us. So everything is basically, there's no extra cost for anyone who shipped out of China, unless the parcels were already custom cleared. But even then, most Chinese logistic company gave the money back. And this all happens in a period of, well, the announcement is probably was 3 or 4 days once it starts to come alive. But actually us shipping and then asking for the payments is 3 days. But this was 3 days, 72 hours of instant global communication across all team members, across all clients across the globe. So it was very intense few days. Everyone was very relieved, obviously, that it was postponed, but also cautious. Okay, what does that mean? Like for me as a business owner, where am I going to position myself going forward? And I think that's also something that is going to, I'm sure we're going to come to it as well in this podcast as well, like how to prepare for the next steps. But regarding the minimis itself, Dayu, anything that you think needs to be added to?
Well, yeah, I mean, the grand scheme of things, actually, the customs clearing approach that our couriers were using, it was actually pretty cheap comparatively what the worst case could have been. So basically at the time, there was actually a lot of fear, like even from consumers actually, that everything that they might have bought from China already that was shipped, they would not only have to pay duty, but pay like $30 extra dollars. $32.71 is the exact number actually. On top of any fees, duty for every single package. And that was actually a huge misunderstanding of how customs declaring works or the options for it. So basically, if you're declaring on a formal basis, there is a minimum fee. But we're talking about like a container, we're talking about like a bulk shipment, that there is either a small percentage fee or there's a minimum fee called the MPF of $32.71. So a lot of actually even consumers freaked out. I was like, oh shoot, I bought like this keyboard from China. I have to pay $32 on top of what I paid for. That was definitely not exactly the case, because that was just a misunderstanding of this fee for traditional bulk processing. So previously, once again, there is a customs processing process approach called T86 processing. Essentially, that just related to Section 321 de minimis. It fast tracks process, but with the right documentation, with the right HTS codes through customs. But with the elimination of de minimis, T86 also went away. However, there was a relatively lesser known processing method called the T11 informal customs processing approach. And what that is it's reserved for packages under or shipments under $2,500 in value. And it's essentially an informal way, quote unquote, to process these like lower value shipments that still have a fee, MPF fee associated with it. However, it has a much lower minimum fee of $2.62. And that's where that customs fee comes from Unixpress and our couriers, because they were essentially just paying that T11 informal processing fee, which is still way better than $32, right? Of course, you still have to pay duty on top of that. So that was the interim solution that was not ideal. I mean, because you're paying like, almost $3 a fee, or like $2.75 or so, like currency adjusted, plus 10, 20, 30% duty, right? And most couriers, they were just pre-collecting 30% duty, just to be safe, and potentially adjusting it after the fact. However, the biggest issue that everyone was starting to like consider was this question of, what do you declare as value in T11 processing? And so this is where it gets really tricky, where T11 processing, technically the importer record, the IOR, is the recipient. So whether it is a B2B shipment, or for a B2C consumer shipment, the importer technically is the customer, which technically means that value, declared value, should be the market value of that parcel. Technically, the retail value. And most strictly, what the customer paid for. Give me an example, right? If you're a brand selling something for $30, but the product itself might actually cost $3 of factory costs. Okay. So in a traditional import method, I'm talking about like traditionally like sending a container, selling in a store, for example. When you clear customs, your duty is paid on that $3 factory costs. So let's just say you have like 30% duty without fees, keep things simple. You're paying 90 cents on that import duty. Now, on the other extreme, if your declared value is on the retail value, so technically $30 that the customer paid for, 30% of that, that's $9. I mean, that's a huge difference. Now, at the time, our couriers, they were directly suggesting to us that, first of all, you got to be really careful declaring like $1 factory cogs, even if it is actually worth $1, right? You have to declare something more reasonable. They were suggesting to us, and we were passing on that suggestion to our clients, that, okay, depending on the size, the value of the product, it may be like $5 or $10, like, so, again, this was not something that anyone exactly knew what the formal requirements actually were going to be, because not a lot of people were using this T11 informal processing anyways. And we were just passing on our courier suggestions that $5, $10 might be reasonable for a consumer size package. But no one exactly knew if there's going to be any issues. And honestly, not a lot of people actually knew the even legal implications of like declaring something like that. For better or for worse though, no one found out, because like a few days like after these massive amounts of packages started getting sent through T11, the borders, the customs were so clogged up that Trump, it was on February 7th or 8th or so, depending on which time zone you're in, he temporarily paused the order for the de minimis. 10% tariff is going to stay probably forever, unfortunately. But at least the de minimis elimination was temporarily paused, most likely because of this absurd backlogs at customs. And keep in mind that a courier like Union Express has this creative method of T11. There were a tons of other shipping methods, other couriers that had no idea like what to do. Like, so like they were just arriving at customs and no idea how to, like, no one had any idea how to deal with it. So it was temporarily paused. And now we're in that current stable state right now. So the de minimis elimination is paused with the very, very clear understanding that as soon as the US government and customs is ready, they have the right to enact the elimination all over again. We do expect, no idea when. So it's said that maybe within 30 days of the pause, so sometime in mid-March, the earliest, there's supposed to be the elimination should come back again, but no one really knows, because hopefully it should depend on if customs is actually ready, not when the government decides to kind of put that pressure on customs again. So it still is an issue. It's still something that we need to prepare for. And again, very important reminder that T11 informal processing has the issue of what do you declare as declared value. And if you have to declare your retail price or anywhere close to that, that's a way more expensive customs fee and duty compared to if you were able to actually declare on the factory. So let me pause there for now, because Simon, you also have a lot of experience dealing with factories and kind of a larger bulk goods from before. If you actually might be a little bit better at kind of explaining like how normally that traditional import process actually works if you're like shipping a container somewhere.
So one thing to add though is that I think the de minimis was announced in the 70s, in 1970s or something. So that means that if you cancel a rule, nobody knows what to fall back on. And that was like kind of like the struggle of searching, okay, which section can I now use to do the clearance by and still make it legal? Because there was no advice with, okay, we're going to stop this, start using that, and this will be the implication. It was just, we're going to stop this and figure it out. How are you going to get the parcel through? That kind of was the period that people are navigating. Oh, we have this one, we have that one, we have that one. Okay, let's go with the T11 for now. Oh, wait, this is the complication. This is still evolving, and there might be new legislations or new sections or new implications of using certain sections going forward for shipping small parcels at least. So that's definitely something that you have to understand, that the cancellation came suddenly, but there was nothing to fall back on. There might have been, but it was never established because there was no need to establish it in itself. So building up legislation takes a long time in itself. So probably just for the meantime, whenever they will implement or cancel the pause, so to say, it's just going to figure out which ones are there that we can leverage to the fullest. But it's never going to be an exact fit. When it comes to B2B shipments, the import of record is always crucial. That means somebody is the owner of the goods once it's entered the country or the EU or whatever the zone is that you're located in. And then for small parcels, technically it could be the sender or the receiver. And normally with B2C, there's not really an intermediate company unless the clearance is happening under an entity and then passed on to the last mile. So these are a different flow. For B2B, there's always going to be an owner that is responsible for the import and needs to declare it, normally based on the FOB price or the SIF price, the cost, insurance, and freight, which is product cost plus the shipping by sea or whatever methods used, and then the imports in itself. So normally that's kind of like where you never have to consider the retail price for B2B because there is technically no sales transfer yet. The products are received by normally a warehouse and cleared under a company. So the company doesn't have to own the warehouse. The company is the owner of the goods, moving to a warehouse where you keep the inventory. And that inventory then is there still owned by that company. And then it can be still sold, right? Online or anywhere or in the retail, or it's going to be pallets are going to be moved to retail locations or whatever the format is. And then once it's there, then it's going to be sold to the consumer. That's where that transaction happens. So there is actually different stages for B2B before it actually reaches a consumer hands. and whenever they start to purchase it itself. So it might mean that the product will flip multiple times because it might be sold from a warehouse to a distributor to a retailer to the consumer. So that's also why you cannot determine really the retail price for that, and there's also no need to. But there is always going to be an import tax for everything you're importing. There's always going to be duties and taxes involved for B2B. That's not new. The main new thing is the additional 10%, everything from China, that's produced in China at least, made in China. And there's going to be some more difficulties maybe on, okay, how do I optimize if I'm having stock, which some of our clients do. I'm importing in bulk, B2B into the US, and I'm leveraging China fulfillment for the rest of the world. Like, how do I navigate this more effectively? Should I just make a full switch to just the US and keep everything doing B2B? Or should I do it from China in fullest? And I think that made a lot of people question their business model, at least for our client base. But for the traditional B2B, the impact is, in that sense, limited, other than there's going to be more question. What has happened, though, with B2B is that there were bulk shipments in containers that were already in boxes. So they were not palletized, but they were independent boxes. So just fill up a whole loose, like a container with boxes. These boxes were taken out and cleared as a parcel to stay under this 800 de minimis, right? That loophole was something they also wanted to close, because then you're just misusing a B2B movement and kind of like taking it apart and transfer it into B2C clearance. There was a lot of misuse happening that had to be resolved anyway. So I fully agree that there's things that needs to be adjusted and planned for. But for B2B, impact is in that sense limited, but navigating that optimal mix that we have also been sharing in the past podcast about hybrid fulfillment, that's definitely something like a question that our clients are dealing with. How do we navigate this?
The reason why I actually asked about that is because currently, as a next step to prepare for a more efficient solution for D2C shipping from China, is actually closer to that traditional B2B import model, where, and our couriers are diligently working on this, is where technically this is actually feasible. By going through a formal import process first to get into the United States, so similar to more of that B2B like bulk processing, therefore being able to actually pay duty on your factory COGS, your $3 factory COGS in the example that we just used versus $30 retail. And then you pay 90 cents or equivalent in terms of the duty rate. And then that gets sent to your customers. So that's the model that the China couriers are currently working on. And that has two important benefits. One is that makes it more legitimate that the declared value is actually on the factory COGS as opposed to the retail value of the parcel itself. And then two, hopefully that's going to also simplify the fee structure as well. So currently we don't exactly know what the fee structure is actually going to be. It may not be as straightforward as just 30% duty rate on your factory COGS plus some small fee. It might actually be a complete DDP method as well. So we're not exactly certain how the pricing model is going to work, but it should be somewhat cheaper than the T11 processing model, especially if you're considering the fact that you can legitimately declare your factory COGS as opposed to your retail value. Now, please follow our updates because this approach is not out yet. And the way that I'm understanding it, this is actually a legitimate legal method to be able to declare customs, to be able to send it to your customers, and not have the importer be the customer themselves. So whatever it is that something like Union Express is doing, like either they're using their own company or like a third party, they're getting that import into the US first, legally. Okay, and then sending it to your customers. There is always some questions about, okay, well, is that legitimate compared to, because you're still sending it to the end customer in the first place, right? So right now, we understand it that at least in the current reading of the custom regulations, customs requirements, it is actually completely legitimate. There's always a possibility that customs comes back and actually updates the regulations to, something that restricts this. However, as of now, we do feel like that it would be a legitimate method. But the only thing is that we don't exactly know like what the actual approach is. Definitely will advise our clients and listeners as well how we feel about this method, how legitimate it actually is, and if we do feel comfortable recommending it, and avoid any potential risk, obviously, on our clients or the end customers as well. but it is actually possible. There are a couple of important downsides, though, to be aware of this model. Is first, it needs scale. The courier has to have enough scale to be able to actually, on a daily or multi-day, multiple times per day basis, be able to have enough volume to be able to clear these kind of large, shipments through customs. So it has to be something like Unixpress or like that kind of scale. In the future, one of the strong suggestions is definitely avoid working with smaller logistics couriers who are not going to be able to support something like this. And then the second is the nature of this. It does require that you have enough volume even within each shipment to declare under one HTS code. So it doesn't mean the entire container, the entire air shipment is all one HTS code, but there has to be a balance. Like, it doesn't work if a plane shipment has 10,000 different HTS codes, 10,000 different products, right? One implication for brand owners is that if you're selling a very common product, that shares a lot, that shares HTS codes with a lot more, so if you're selling apparel, for example, right, and it shares HTS codes with a lot of other apparel products, then that could be fine. But if you're selling something a little bit more unique, that has a unique HTS code, if you don't have yourself as a brand owner enough daily volume of that product, then most likely you still can't use this method because you just don't have enough volume. The courier doesn't have enough volume to be able to consolidate these products into one HTS code for declaration as well. Those are just some watch outs. So you need to work with someone in scale, and you yourself as a brand owner, your product probably needs to hit a certain amount of scale to be able to actually use this method in order to get what we believe will be the most efficient way to clear customs and be able to legitimately declare value on your factory COGS. And by the way, none of this actually really matters until if or when de minimis elimination actually comes back. There is certainly a school of thought that believes that de minimis elimination is going to be paused indefinitely, or it's going to be a long time before it actually comes back. So just keep in mind, right now, everything is normal. Everything is exactly the same as it was before. If anything, actually, direct from China fulfillment is actually has an advantage over traditional B2B freight, because traditional B2B freight, you have the 10% additional tariffs. Whereas direct parcel fulfillment from China, once again, it still falls under the de minimis rule, which means no duty, no customs fees at all. However, just again, more scrutiny at borders just to make sure that you're actually declaring your correct HTS code and not sending anything that's illegitimate or illicit.
Yeah, when it comes to actually B2B clearance, normally most forwarders, they charge, I think, up to 5 HTS codes is one fixed price, and each extra HTS code as an surcharge. So then basically the handling fee might be based on HTS codes instead of orders, right? So that's a very big nuance. So if you have a wide variety of products, let's say a drop shipping company or agent, the orders are very diverse. You need so many different HTS codes that it doesn't make sense anymore, because you have to pay the fee for each HTS code, whether it's one order or 100 orders for the same product. In our case, we have much more evolved clients. Some have thousands of orders a day of the same product, maybe a different color or maybe a little bit different style, but it's the same HTS code. So then we should not pay 1,000 times for the same clearance fee if actually it can be cleared under the same number, the same HTS number. So that nuance is very important because it will simplify custom clearance as well. I mean, the main thing is to close the loop and make sure illegal stuff is happening. There's nothing illegal to bringing these goods with the same HTS code that are actually that product into the country. But there might be extra charges based on the nature of the products, which is the HTS code. I think that's why also that direction is very plausible, what we describe as the probably next future of custom clearance of B2C parcels. For Ecommerce, China fulfillment is the main thing forward. That means that this all have, and US is a big component of the volume of Ecommerce to itself. Do you consider this a negative impact on Ecommerce or China fulfillment maybe in general? Like, how do you see this evolving as a company then?
Let's assume we're talking about the worst case where 10% tariff stays and then also de minimis elimination comes back. Okay, so in that worst case scenario, everyone gets hurt. And I mean everyone, not just every China fulfillment company, but everyone actually gets hurt, including like anyone who's importing goods, formally B2B. Consumers are going to get hurt, by the way, because all this really does is just actually increase inflation at the end of the day, right? The thing about like tariffs, especially protectionist tariffs, is at the end of the day, it's the consumers that pay for it. It gets passed on to the consumers, and there is a faulty school of thought thinking that if you put tariffs on Chinese made products, then it's going to make your domestic products more competitive. Well, first of all, a lot of products aren't even made in the US or can't be made in the US. Now, even if it can be made in the US, that US manufacturer, that US company is not just going to sell it for cheaper. If they know they can sell it for 30% higher because a Chinese good is going to be 30% higher anyways, they're going to charge you 30% higher. They might charge you 25% higher, you know what I mean? But it's not like you're not really like net saving that. I mean, I'm an economics major, so like I've actually like learned about all this a lot, and basically tariffs like never really work for the intended purpose, at least, of, you know, really kind of protecting against other countries' goods and having a net positive benefit on the consumers themselves. Now, on ecom ops, I actually think that okay, so it's going to be bad for everyone. However, relatively speaking, I think that and I don't just mean ecom ops, but the type of clients that typically works with ecom ops. So higher volume brands, D2C brands that, you know, they typically do not sell like extremely cheap generic goods. It's not based on just kind of just very, very small margins that usually is the case for like a pure drop shipping type of model, for example. I think that the sellers, the businesses that are going to be really hurt by this are going to be one, direct from China sellers who are trying to just sell for really cheap. And there's like more and more of those these days. I mean, so I'm not talking about Temu, by the way. By the way, Temu is going to be fine because Temu has so many resources to deal with this. They have like more and more local fulfillment that supposedly you know, all of this trying to control Temu and Shein, it's not going to work because they're going to figure out ways to like make money anyways, right? However, there are actually a lot of like way smaller Chinese companies that are not nearly at the scale of Temu, but they still sell to like US consumers. But they really depend on just low prices and like they make tiny margins, and that's where like they're going to be really hurt by this. Drop shippers, like pure drop shippers, are going to be hurt by this as well. If your business model were like actually depended on saving on this duty just to make money, then you're going to be hurt on this, right? However, if you have a legitimate brand, if you like have a brand that customers actually want to purchase for, if you have like very healthy profit margins because of that, then you'll be not only totally fine, even with de minimis coming back. I would actually argue that you come out ahead when you have like cheap sellers, generic sellers, copycats, you know, sellers doing illegitimate things. If they're like really priced out or they're like pushed out, then the brands that are doing it legitimately, selling good products with great customer experiences, being able to charge higher prices, those get more competitive. And fortunately, I do consider ourselves very fortunate as ecom ops that, you know, we really kind of work more with these kind of brands. And I really want to emphasize to the audience hearing this, like if you're not really in that direction, kind of building a real DTC brand that has like long-term value, now is the time to do it. Like if you're dropshipping from China right now, if you're like terrified of your business during this, you know, the whole like uncertain situation, you probably have a right to be terrified. Like you probably should actually really think about your business model and build a long-term business that does not depend on not having to pay import duties. And actually, you know, one last important thing is again, like on that point, is every product made in China, no matter where you ship it from. There's two parts of that. One is if and when de minimis elimination actually comes back, you have really no efficient ways, even to like, you have limited options even to get bulk freight into the US. So if you are already shipping containers on a boat, going through the customs declaration process, then you have that 10% tariff. I mean, if you're, I mean, if you're doing B2B, you know, import shipments to the US and having like a US fulfillment center, for example, then like you have a 10% additional tariff and you can't get away from that, right? However, if you're talking about like smaller, medium-sized D2C e-commerce brands, most of these brands are not using traditional formal freight. When you're using freight, you're using some kind of DDP. And DDP also depends on de minimis to actually make it work. I've gotten a lot of quotes, by the way, for anything that's less than a container on air and on sea. If you go through formal processing for anything that's less than a container, like that base shipping freight price is actually more expensive than DDP already. And then you have to add on the duties and the customs processing fee. So don't think that if you're already using freight, unless you're customs formally processing customs on a container basis, your costs are going to shoot up even for like US import and US fulfillment. Also, there was always the hope that you could just ship a batch of products to Mexico, right? And then skip the minimis and also these tariffs. You can't do that because it has to be made in China. And by the way, there's also some couriers saying that there might be an option to ship your goods to a third party or a third country first, like Korea, for example, and then being able to say that it's not made from China. However, the requirement is that you can't have made in China on the label, on like the product itself, which is, by the way, illegal. That is extremely illegal. Okay, so do not even consider that method if you want to run a legal business. Okay, and don't mess around with the US government for stuff like that, which basically means that you have no choice. If your product is made in China, everything's going to get a lot more expensive, including local US fulfillment as well, unless, again, you're like moving containers, formal processing every single time. So everyone is going to feel the pain, unfortunately. But I do think that if you are actually running a great brand and you're doing things correctly, relatively speaking, I think you're still going to be more competitive on a net basis. And that's also why, like, I think that for ecom ops, kind of just given our client mix of these more legitimate brands, I'm personally not as worried. We are incredibly concerned with helping to support our clients and making sure that they can continue to like stay in business and make money. So we will do everything possible to try to support them, to try to find the best efficient shipping options legally. Okay, like the best legitimate options to make sure that they can still operate their business and still compete in this world.
To close off this episode, what our clients are doing actually is most have increased their sales price, maybe up to $5 or a little bit higher, depending on the product. Even if you talk about the big brands like Louis Vuitton or other products that are still getting products from China, they're not impacted or they're not worried about increasing their product with $5 or $10 or maybe even a multiple of that. So if you are an established brand, you shouldn't be concerned. But it is a great opportunity to start to think globally and explore what's more out there for you outside of the US and really position yourself as a global brand. That is a huge opportunity that has been maybe ignored because there was sufficient growth in the US. That is becoming imminent now because you can become a global brand that has an impact on consumers in a positive way. That is, I think, is the positive takeaway of it, of you speeding up, ramping up these operations quicker than you might have planned for, because there's a necessity for you to differentiate, and that becomes more important now than ever. So that's also something for us that we strongly advise our clients to explore, test it. You don't even have to localize the language, just start running ads in English and see how that goes. But to wrap up actually the podcast for today, really appreciate you listening. Please do follow Dayu on his Facebook channel. Follow me on LinkedIn and check out our YouTube as well. These channels have more updates on US de minimis. If it's going to be a big update, we're going to use the podcast. But for minor updates on things that are happening and evolving, check us out. Dayu on Facebook, myself on LinkedIn. We'll put the links in the show notes. And we have our YouTube channel if you want to have a more visual view of what the implications are. We're going to focus on this podcast with episodes on supply chain. So it's not going to be exclusively about the import tariffs and the de minimis, but anything relevant of changes that are happening that you need to know about, and we're going to dissect them. So please follow us. I really appreciate you listening up until the end, and see you on the next podcast.